Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to give it a few minutes so people can get logged in, and we'll start in just a minute or two. Thanks for joining. We'll get started in a minute or two, just letting people get logged in. We have a lot of attendees today. All right, let's go ahead and get started then. So thank you again for joining us. This is the second to last installment in our Affordable Housing 101 Back to Basics series. We have one more session next Tuesday, and I'll post in the chat the registration link for that in case you are interested in coming. But today we're covering the phases of affordable housing design plus navigating entitlements. And our speakers today are John Arnold, a partner at KFA Architecture and a longtime SCAMP member, and Monica Rodriguez, who recently left KFA to join House and Robertson, where she is a senior project architect. As a matter of logistics, we will share the recording with everyone after the session, and we'll have time for questions at the end. So please post them in the Q&A box, not the chat, so that we can track them a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to John and Monica, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. It's a premium. Matter of
Yeah, thanks. Same. You want to go to the view mode, yeah. Slideshow, right? Yeah.
Whoops. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. As Jeanette said, my name is John Arnold. I'm a partner at KFA Architecture. We're in Culver City, and a lot of the work we do is in affordable housing and multifamily housing. And I've been with the firm for 23 years, and I've been working for about 20 of them with.
Yeah, and as Jeanette mentioned, my name is Monica Rodriguez, but as Jeanette mentioned, I recently left KFA, but I was there for almost 17 years actually, and I'm still involved with and still very much interested and involved with affordable housing. So here I am.
So today we're going to be talking. We've done this presentation before. Both Monica and I. We've tweaked it to present it to public officials, which I think is the most majority of the crowd today. And so we're going to talk about the entitlement process for an affordable housing project, and also the climate that we're in today. So where are we today? Public officials and us architects, we're in the middle of a tug of war between constituents' quality of life issues on one side and the need for low-cost affordable housing on the other, both of which are identified to be public interests. Sacramento is in the public interest. What they're doing is to help solve the housing crisis. We know that a lot of planners have worked hard in their municipalities to fine-tune their planning codes and their design review processes, only to have Sacramento, like an elephant in the room, come down and squash prescriptions and really surprise everybody with, all the best intents. So what we're here today to say is that as architects, we believe that there is a solution to this, and that, of course, is design. And we believe that, and the theme of the course today is that design in an environment of state mandated densities with increasing availability of incentives and waivers, thoughtful design can mitigate adverse effects on city planning efforts and neighborhood character. And these, of course, include things like height, setbacks, parking, design review, open space, floor area ratio, all the hot button issues, which many of you are not surprised, where I'm going to say the most obvious thing today, very sensitive to existing residents. So we're here today to walk through, first of all, the process, and Monica is going to talk about the learning objectives.
So for today's webinar, event, the takeaways that we hope that everybody in attendance can take home with them are listed on the screen. So you want ability to identify key areas of opportunities for design input by public officials in the development of affordable housing projects in their districts and neighborhoods. Also, attendees will be able to understand the design process during conceptual design and entitlements and the importance of these phases in project cost trajectory. Also become familiar with basic design tools that do not diminish density, avoid unnecessary costs, and help projects meet community standards and design goals. And lastly, learn how prescriptive design guidelines can be made more flexible and still meet their intent and good design.
So first we're going to go through we have a lot of words and then we have a lot of pictures. So bear with the words. The design phases, the phases of the design process, just in case you're not familiar with it. The first thing we do as architects is we have a client call us and say, I have an idea for a project and I have a prospective site that I want to look at. And this is called a due diligence phase, a what fits, a yield study, a site analysis phase. We have a lot of names for it. And basically developers come to us with a site, with maybe a preconceived idea, maybe not. Maybe the numbers say that they can fit a certain amount. And they say, what can I actually fit? And we do a diagram. We put the program on it. We put all the things as architects who are experienced in this, no need to go into a design. And we look at them pretty perfunctory, in a general overview, and see what fits. And we do a diagram and we do some numbers. And then when that is done, the developer has everything in front of them, including the cost of the site. And then they say, is this worth it? Is this worth it for us to buy? And can we get to where we need to go with this number of units or this cost or this entitlements path? That plays a big factor on how difficult an entitlement path is. And then they make a commitment. Usually it's a purchase and sale agreement. And then we go forward and we're off and running. There's a commitment from the developer. We have an idea of what we're doing. And then we start developing that idea. And that brings us to the third step, which is the entitlements and funding submittals and approvals. This is specific to affordable housing. These two things go in tandem with each other, where there's an entitlements process and there's a funding process. And we start putting drawings together. It's still conceptual design. And we start putting the entitlements path together, including the waivers and incentives that we might need from a municipality. And we start putting what we call a package. It's a drawing package. And in this case, it will be at floor plans, elevations, sometimes a perspective if it's required. And then we use that set to go after any entitlements and to go after funding. And sometimes that set has a really long life, 1 or 2 or 3 years, where it's going through all these hoops to get approvals. And then when the approvals start coming in and funding starts coming in, then we take that set and then we start to make it real. Monica is going to describe in a second why those first phases are so important to you and why they're so important to have input on those phases. But before that, so after we get the entitlement set together, we go into schematic design and design development, which is basically bringing consultants, and it just adds more detail, adds more clarity. In every phase that we go through, the design gets more and more locked in. Costs get adjusted, value engineering happens, and things just start locking down. And the further we get on in this process into construction documents, the harder it is for us to extract and go backwards. So it's really important that we really have a really clear roadmap in the first half of this process. So once we go through schematic design, design development, it's locking down, then we're really getting serious. And we really have an eye on the permit and construction. We start going into construction documents, which involves plan check, going into plan check submittal, talking to fire departments and building departments, and getting really homing in on costs, because the contractors start getting involved in this phase as well. Very important for affordable housing to make sure that costs don't spiral. Our job, again, early on, is to make sure we're not designing something that will be costly in the end. And then finally, in the last phase, construction documents, part 2, final permitting, the final bidding, final contracting, all the funding starts coming in. There's a few weeks where there's a flurry of activity to get these done.
So as John was describing those different phases, again, we're going to focus for today's seminar webinar, we're going to focus on those first three, which are, as he mentioned, are the early stages of design and entitlements. And it's also the most where you can have the most, it's kind of like the opportune time. It's the best opportunity, the best time to go ahead and have that input from city officials, from other, to affect design and affect change. As it gets on to further ones, it gets a little bit more expensive. So as it says on the bottom, early stages are the best time to affect positive change and to avoid delays and backtracking.
And I think in the environment we're in now, where all of a sudden 33 extra feet gets added onto a project, it'd be really easy to say, oh no, can we please get it down? Can we please get it down? Because it seems so big. But I think that's in the early phase is the time to accept that and then see what design mitigations can happen to mitigate things that are really seem out of scale. And we're going to get into some examples of that later. So some basic site analysis things that we do when we're talking about planning and zoning. First thing we do is look at the base zone. All municipalities have a base zone, the density, it describes the height and setback. And then from that, we have a simple understanding of the site. And then we have to look at all the other things that might be overlaid onto that zone. One of them is, just as the name says, specific plans and overlays. These are everywhere. All municipalities have them. Long Beach has one in the downtown. LA is full of them with HPOZs, historic zone. Santa Monica has them. So a lot of municipalities have these overlays, which either enhance or make clearer design guidelines of what's allowed, what's required in a zone. Another thing we look at is adjacencies to other zones. We want to make sure that projects, that we're understanding what's around us, because what's around us can affect our project and vice versa. So we look at shade and shadow, we look at where the single family zones are. And then we also look at, we had one project in Santa Monica that was near a gravel pit, and the owner was very concerned that dust was going to come this way. The gravel pit owner was concerned that they were going to get complaints about their dust. So we really want to go out and look and see what's around the site and what's around in the adjacent zones that might affect us, whether it's commercial, residential, industrial. Development conditions, LA is famous for these, where they have a zone and they have a little D and Q next to it, totally changes the zone. So we really have to do some discovery into the parcel, into the zone, and make sure there aren't cases in there that change what the rules are. And we all have stories about where those weren't discovered and they come back and affect the later phases. Incentive areas and programs, TOC, transit-oriented communities in the city of LA is a famous one. But there are all cities have some kind of incentives for affordable housing, whether they're based in the density bonus or not. Historic designations are very important. Designing in historic districts are difficult because they have prescriptive design requirements. And then we wrote down here actual or possible. I always advise developers, if there is an existing building on the site that is old and cute, be wary. And if it's not designated historic, it's probably loved in the neighborhood. And there might be some exposure there to risk of getting appealed or questioned or blocked. So look for historic designations. And finally, the grandfather, grandmother, the elephant in the room, the state density bonus laws with all of its additions that really create a whole set of nuances onto the base zoning.
So on top of all the zoning guidelines that John just went through, there's the non-zoning stuff that we consider also as part of the design process and what our considerations are. So slope and soils, they both can vary. They both can be very expensive to work with. If your building's on a hillside ordinance, that's automatically going to be a more expensive site to develop than if it's a flat, relatively flat site. Soil, typically flat and sandy is best, but sometimes you do get soil that needs to be, maybe it doesn't have the right filtration or something. It's not the best dirt that we have. Also lot shape. So ideally the best, the most kind of the cheapest or the most effective economic is rectangular is always easier, or square. But that's not always the case. There's always going to be some sites that are, developers want to see if it's feasible, and maybe it's an L shape, or maybe it's like, has some different angles in it. And so that's always something to consider. Wires and utilities, so DWP, SoCal Edison, Cal OSHA, that can be super costly. If there happens to be power poles or has to be power lines crossing over or anything even underground happening, that's something to consider. Fire department access. So this is always from, so learn from experience that you want to go in and meet with your fire department as soon as possible to see what the access is to your design. And based on that original feasibility study that you have or yield study, you look to see, because nowadays, you don't, if especially if it's a larger site, chances are you're going to have fire department access a lane. And that's really going to, if you don't already kind of have a plan for that, that's really going to make you have to rearrange some things. Easements and highway dedication. So nowadays, mostly every property is going to have a highway dedication. And it's something to just kind of be aware of mostly. And easements, you can have an easements for utility lines. You can also have an easements for access. So that's something to consider. Lastly, faults and other geologic, environmental, or hydrologic site issues. So, along with the soils report that you get, maybe the dirt is contaminated and there's going to need, you're going to have to take out, probably 2-3 feet of the dirt or maybe even more and have it new soil brought in. So these are considerations, but as John mentioned previously, like what's really important, and we say that to everybody, to architects, to even to city officials and elected officials, to go and look at the site and be familiar with the site and see what's around it. It might be an activity that you're not going to get from Google Maps, that or some emphasis, some focus that you won't see necessarily on Google Maps.
And these are all preliminary things that we look at to control costs, control expectations. And really, because once a developer commits, especially an affordable housing developer, especially a nonprofit affordable housing developer, if eyes aren't wide open, their expectations aren't met. Instead of the 100 units that the site they thought could fit, it can only fit 80 or 75 or fewer. And so sometimes the numbers, without doing an analysis, the numbers can definitely lie. There's a lot of single lots in LA that say zoning says I can fit 33 units with a density bonus. It's really, really, really hard, if not impossible, to especially for larger units, to fit 33 units on a single lot with all the other things we have to consider in design. Then let's talk about design. And so the next part of this presentation is going to be about design and how do we control costs, but also have projects that communities can be proud of, that are good for people to live in, but also are buildable and don't spend money unnecessarily. And so in the yellow box up here, and I'm not advocating for this, but this is a fact, the most efficient housing project has only 2 stairs, a double loaded corridor, stacking units, and 1 elevator bank. And every square foot of built space, which runs between $200 and $400 per square foot, has a use. Anything beyond that, even if they are improvements to the design, will raise costs and be subject to value engineering. So our thought here is to pick and choose the battles of where you will spend money for the best effect. And the most common places where design and cost efficiency is lost in the early phases, and this is in pre-design and planning building, are unstacked units and floors requiring structural MEP transition. Anytime there's a misalignment from floor to floor, there's cost and structure and MEP that has to transition between those two. And some of those things are prescribed in the zoning code, like a 10-foot setback at above 30 feet is really difficult and really costly. It changes the unit design and everything unstacked. So watch out for that. But there are other ways to get the step backs to meet that intent. Agency requirements for style, articulation, materials, massing, and height. Spanish style is notoriously expensive if you aren't careful with it, but there are ways to do it where, and we have a few examples, you can do Spanish style and still keep that efficiency and keep costs down. Design concepts require additional steel and concrete. This is often the architect's fault. If they come in and say, I really want to do something that juts out this way and turns up this way, and there's a big hole in the middle of the building that you can see through to the mountains, all that is structural gymnastics that are really, really costly. So again, that doesn't come in your zone, it comes in ours. Single loaded corridors are really popular for good reason. They allow light and air at the doorways of people's units, but they are expensive. They cost more to build, and you have to double your volume of corridor that you build. That said, there are ways to have it half and half, have corridors that are day lit. So again, pick and choose and what makes sense for the project. Bridges, cantilevers, and long span. So there's things that require steel and concrete. Design concepts that require excess glazing and doors. Windows are great, everyone loves them, but a lot of storefront, a lot of glazing in a unit is very expensive. And maybe if it doesn't necessarily affect the quality of the unit, too much glass, people keep the blinds closed, but maybe the building can have some in certain places. And then lastly, and this is more on us, but on all of us, any missed program in the early phases, whether it's a transformer, how trash is handled, accessibility, complete exit systems, fire access, as Monica mentioned, LID, which is oil infiltration, EV parking, solar panels, and having basically functional units. If any of these are missed, they can cause havoc in the later design phases.
So now we'll take a little bit and talk about the free things that you can use for design. And by free, we mean like opportunities that don't really, the dollar amount for them is not that much. So you might as well kind of capitalize them and maybe even strengthen them and focus on them. So light and air, having a building, not just a block and a box, but having actually openness and having an ability to have like courtyards, and courtyards open to the public space. Space, use your envelope and your land wisely and artfully. Massing and proportion, so the building's basic shape and the relative scale of its pieces, especially now with height increases, and you can go additional 33 feet and you can get more height. Sometimes people are a little afraid of that and thinking, oh, it's 6-story building, but if you can have a 6-story building that has some massing and some kind of cutouts, that's actually better than a 5-story block. So think about those things. Color, all buildings will have color, and so you use it to your best effect, right? It can be, the materials can be the same, but if you can start introducing color in a very good, effective way, that's really successful. Lines and angles, judicious use of lines and angles can enhance the simplest buildings without significant added cost, especially if you don't, kind of take advantage of also of the site. And if it's not a rectangular site and it has angles, like design to those angles. I think that's always a good solution. Configuration, arrangement of materials and adjacencies in plan and elevation. So always think about it in elevation. What's it look like? What's it look like in plan? And always just kind of thinking about the building as a 3D element. And how can that be configured in a way that's more, it's still using, the use is still there and the purpose is still there, but you're taking advantage of the building shape. And highlight a building's assets. For instance, if you do have a courtyard that's opened up in the public way, is way better than a donut building, right? And kind of closing it off, locating massing relief where it will have the greatest visual and spatial impact, and also provide stylistic flair only in places with high visibility from the public way. And so again, we're actually going to end up talking a lot about these points that we've made here in the next slides. But affordable housing can be beautiful, functional, livable without employing expensive materials and elaborate structure. So take advantage of these free things, and I think also it's being aware of these things, right? As the job that you're doing, and kind of asking and maybe pushing these items in the future projects.
Yeah, and I think this is just to reiterate, this is the crux of our argument. And especially as you as public officials, to make suggestions to developers like put more glazing in, or make it brick, or put more, step it back in a wedding cake at 10 feet, 10 feet, 10 feet. All those things cost money, and developers try, and architects try their best to accommodate that, but it escalates costs. So what we're looking at is, what are the simpler things you can do that get the same effect, the same intent that might be prescribed in your code, or might be, in what the neighborhood wants, and how do you do that judiciously and get to where you need to go for design that everyone can love. So I'm going to go through quickly a sample project. Check the time here. A sample project of the process of getting from zero to a submittals set. So this is a site in the Valley in Los Angeles, in the city of Los Angeles. Very awkward site, very complexly shaped. Had next to an R1, it was a series of single-family homes that were rezoned. You can see all the TEQ, C21VL, and R11 on there. It's a very complex zone, and we really had to look at a lot of the adjacencies to get this project to fit. You can see we have an alley that had wires going down it that were on our side, so we had to make sure our building didn't interrupt the wire flow, because that's very costly to unmitigate. And we just had to look at the what was around us. We had a cemetery to our north, so we were hoping that no one complained from the cemetery. And then we had just a lot of concerned neighbors. You can see we're next to a commercial district. It was kind of in this in-between zone. So we really started thinking about how this project would fit into this site, and all the while think about architecture. So this was on this actual site. This was the box diagram I put together years ago just to show what might fit on the site. So I color code the units, show where the exiting ends up. The elevator, I need an extra stair because of the building shape. So we really start looking at and then doing quick open space quantifications. And then also you can see the parking underlaid underneath that, which is an underground parking garage, and just seeing how that might lay out and how the elevators and stairs might integrate with that. So this is the box diagram that gets converted into a more precise box diagram. And the building, just every step just starts taking shape. And this is the place, this is the zone right now is when we have the most opportunity to start making changes and unearthing problems that the site might have. Now we go further, we start getting information together, start developing the project even more, really fine tuning the height. You can see that portion at the bottom that says 2 stories only. That's in regards to the house next door, a single family house that was the last one on the block. And we really start creating the roadmap for the project. And this goes to this is site plan review, which is entitlements in the city of Los Angeles. And this also went to funding. This start laying units out, always try to get the units to work as well as the architecture. And we really start looking at the opportunities here for architecture. We had this long side along this slightly canted street. We started playing with the units and where the balconies ended up. And we really start looking at how can we affect the design in a positive way to make this building fit, and how can we change the program around. And this is the building that we got out of that long side. It kind of dances down the sidewalk. We grouped the balconies together to break the building up. And we really played with that angle. As Monica said earlier, lines and angles they're very inexpensive just to give a building movement. It gives it some perspective, and it really can help. A simple design move like that can really help make a building come to life and not be a box.
So now we're going to talk about design. So from this point forward, based on what we've just talked about, what we spent the last half hour telling you guys and sharing with you guys, we're just going to go through a series of slides of projects, and John and I are just going to talk about them and about in the same manner, or the same things that we think are important to highlight at the beginning of a project. Obviously, we want to avoid the box, and obviously the picture we have up here is a box. So this is the design that we're trying to avoid in general.
And the weird thing about this design, it might have been a prescriptive response to a zoning code that says change materials every 20 feet. And the architect and the developer said, okay, we're going to change the materials every 20 feet. It doesn't help. What might have helped? We don't know. This is in New Jersey, so we don't know.
Yeah.
And there was an attempt at making an entrance off to the right. Maybe there's a ground floor requirement. But you can see this doesn't work. This is what everyone's afraid of. And you can see even if this was 2 stories lower, it still wouldn't be good. And so we really want to avoid this, not to be snarky with our fellow architects. Our apologies if you're in the room.
So here we have an example of the design focus that we have is massing and proportion. So similar to the previous slide, this is also a 6-story building, but we're looking at the way we're kind of doing the massing and breaking up the mass, the shapes, the forms. We have the color, we have the gray side and the white side with similar materials. Also, the ground floor is opposite from side to side. So we think this is very successful for that. And also on the image on the right, again, it's even like there's no color, but it's the massing and the stepping back and the proportions work really well.
I think the building on the left, that glass atrium is probably where the stairs are, the elevator lobbies. That didn't need to be glass. You can imagine that was an extra, but if it was orange stucco with windows in it, it still would have worked. So I think there's just having simple step in and step outs and really composing it can really go a long way. And it's basically free. And it's they're both 7-story buildings. This is a project we did in Long Beach. Monica and I had a good chuckle with ourselves calling these a mullet building, where it's all business in the front and all the party in the back. And where you basically, the public way is the lower part of the building, and then it steps back to a larger building. So this building that you're looking at on the left is a 5-story building. And you see we've took a lot of care to mask the front. We split the building in the middle. We exposed one of the courtyards to the street, so the building feels smaller. And also courtyards are always better when they face outward and they aren't fully enclosed. And then at the back, you can see in the right photograph, it bumps up to 5 stories along the alley. And also that side backs up to a commercial zone. So we knew there were less sensitivities over there, and also went uphill. So we really just tried to use color and proportion. We were thinking, this is in Long Beach. We're thinking about the vibe of Long Beach and how we make it feel beachy. And a lot of the moves we did, including the taking units out, we had one step back on the left, but mostly the massing was accomplished by taking units fully out and putting them somewhere else, higher up at the back where they don't show as much.
In this example, which is also a KFA project, we're looking at the stepping back that happened. It's also, this is a 4-story building max, but we're looking at the step back. So at the street level, at the pedestrian level, it's a 3-story mass, and then we step back to a 4-story. We also played with color and the little pops of color to like the main entrance with the red, and also the parking entrance, but also that differentiation of between the 3-story mass and the 4-story mass. We looked at the form and the lines and the angles. So the roof of the top, normally, it's definitely a lot. It was an easy move design-wise to add that, and it really made a difference to the length. It's a pretty long building, long development. And so by doing that and breaking up the mass, that helps to make it a less domineering building, I think.
And we also had a lot of community input on this building. It was in a mostly single family and duplex 1-story neighborhood that had this roof form. So we really tried to echo what was happening in the neighborhood, and it made people feel better about a 4-story building. And I think at the end of the day, we really had a lot of support when we didn't have any support to begin with. This is one of my favorite duo of slides, where there's a 4-story building on the left with a giant courtyard and a 7-story on the right with a small courtyard. And from my design eye, I'd much rather be in the building and in the courtyard on the building on the right. It's not just about the materials, but they are better materials. But I think beyond that, the space is more interesting. There's a view out from the courtyard. And what we want to show here is that diminishment in size and expanding open spaces and having more space, especially in response to a more suburban code, doesn't necessarily make a better building. A bigger courtyard is not a better courtyard. It's how you use space and how the pieces orient to each other. To me, this courtyard on the left was so big that they didn't know what to do with it, so they just started filling it up with stuff. And to me, it's austere. It's not a place I want to be. I'd much rather be in the building on the right. So largeness, tightness, smallness, tallness doesn't necessarily mean worse. And if you apply thoughtful design, you can make it better.
This project is in Boyle Heights, and so East Los Angeles. And this project we're highlighting also at the massing, right, and the articulation and the color. So it's actually the same. It's a 6-story building, I believe, or 5-story, 6-story, 5-story building. And again, it's breaking up the mass. It's stepping it back. It's highlighting the corners, like the stair. Most likely, that corner that you see with the graphic with the screen, that's probably a circulation point. And then again, stepping back in the articulation of the roof and really the color and playing with color. And also just to point out, this is next to Gold Line Station. Yeah.
And again, really careful. We know the firm that did this is GGA, and very careful about not unstacking. All of our projects never unstack. It's also, I have it tattooed on my arm. This is a project that was at a prominent corner in South Los Angeles, corner of Jefferson and Central, and also MLK on the backside. So we're at the corner of 3 large streets. And the objective here was to take the courtyard, which could have been internal, and to really open up to the street. And this is a 4-story building that's in a neighborhood that's mostly lower scale. And we really looked at taking the courtyard and making it part of the public space. And when you do that, the building gets deeper. There's a little more places to look in and out. Imagine the first slide with the box, how there's nothing to look at but a box. And here your eye wanders in and out. There's some single loaded corridor at the back, an exposed stair. And we really, again, this is all stacking. There's nothing that's unstacking here. We used the balcony, the opportunity there where we needed an overhang of the balcony, and how to integrate the balcony into a design feature and not spend a lot of money and still make the building interesting. And then, of course, we actually designed these walls to be blank, to have murals, which became a focal point for the community to engage. And the developers really sensitive to the community and hired local artists. They had an RFP put out. A lot of local artists came out to put their bid in to do these murals, and a local woman did these murals, and everyone loves them, and I love them.
So this project is Lehman Architects project that is actually super successful. We think it's in Crenshaw area, or?
No, it's in Rampart.
Rampart area. So again, it's the color, it's the introduction of color and doing it really well, not just necessarily like plastering it everywhere, but like picking and choosing the dark gray mass in the middle. That's probably the elevator or the stair, circulation, the massing of the building, and the kind of, again, the angles, the articulation that we have, the open space, the step, the terrace, planting. It's really just done successfully. Also, there's, you can see there's at-grade parking, which is also a cost savings as well. And it's kind of, the building does a good job in kind of fitting in, and just the mass just really works really successfully.
This is a really irregular site, and the architect did a really good job by twisting the building as the site twisted. And you can see on the left side, it really gives you a really good perspective into the courtyard. Again, this is not architectural magic. This is really fitting the building into the site and taking advantage of it and seeing, where can I add excitement? Where can I add scale? And and these simple yellow corner windows, that's simple framing. The shear walls are outside of that. So basically framing is framing, and twisting these boxes out is a very simple move. Did it cost a little bit more? It certainly did, but only a little bit more. This is not gymnastic, it's wood framing. So we think this is really an interesting project that really doesn't break any of the rules in our estimation. This is a project in Larchmont, or close to Larchmont. We really wanted to fit into the neighborhood, a neighborhood that was mostly single family houses that had a favorable zoning to fit more units. And we really looked at, what is the style. We want horizontal lines, which is a very simple thing to do, but makes a building feel lower. I think Frank Lloyd Wright with very low horizontal lines. We featured simple architectural elements like these brown bars to bring the scale down. And then we knocked out this key unit. So that roof deck that you see up there was a unit, got the unit somewhere else, knocked the building down. There's no unstacking here. We put a roof deck on it. And we just really tried to get a flavor for the building that did not break the bank, and that was and really tried to fit into the neighborhood. Even though I really like this fence in the front, this is a plain metal picket fence, and all we did was take the pickets and jog them back and forth, and suddenly it looked like a bamboo screen, and it just gave it this really delicate custom feature, and it literally cost zero more.
So this project, again, talking about style, a lot of the times in neighborhoods, the neighbors, or just kind of one of the guidelines to things that we're asked to do is the style. And like John mentioned earlier, Spanish Mission Revival is always kind of comes up a lot. And this project it's actually a fairly long site. It's a very long building, and you can see that, as John mentioned before, we're still having stacking, which is the most efficient way to design your building if you're trying to save money or have save some costs. And again, the corner feature with the detailing, right, and the detail of the balconies, and how like we adding whatever we can of in a most deliberate way that's not going to bring necessarily extra cost. And also, again, having a mural painting as a focal feature. Those are, yes, it costs money, but that's also like a nice feature to a building that's going to make it stand out and do well.
And I think this building, your eye goes to that corner. It's actually a train stop on the New K line, and then when you get off the train and enter onto the street, we're down to Boulevard right here. That's what you remember about the project. That's where you can enter it into public space. So losing those two units, finding another place, or using those stacks of units in that corner, finding another place for them, was really a move to make the whole building feel better. And then as it goes down the street, it's like 600 or 700 or 800 feet long, backs up against single family, so it steps down to 2 floors behind. And this is half permanent supportive housing. So permanent supportive housing itself can fit, it's half families as well. And we think this was really successful. And we tried to rise to the challenge of having the city of Inglewood say we want Spanish architecture, and that's what we delivered. This is in Glendale. Glendale's been a very good partner in developing affordable housing. So a large site that was next to it in a mostly single family neighborhood, but next to a freeway. And you can see the simple moves that we did here was to stack the project up towards the freeway, mitigating the noise and the pollution on the freeway. We realized that's an issue as well. And then as we step down to the street, really making sure that the open spaces here are really open to the street. There's depth to the buildings. When you're going down the street, you don't feel like you're against a wall. So other design proposals for this block that were donuts. So all the open space was internal, not being able to help the building articulation. And then we dedicated space right along the front to really bring down the experience of the project in these 2-story masses that look like townhouses. And when you're going down the street, you experience lots of materials, lots of different color changes, lots of depth of open spaces. And then the scale along the street was maintained to what it has always been. Anything else on that?
No, that's great. And so this last example of projects we have is talking about scale, massing, and color. On the project on the left, it's Los Angeles project. It's in Playa Vista, and this is where we kind of talk about height and scale and the scale. So this is actually a 5-story building, but by the way we're articulating the color and the massing and the ground floor, it feels like a 4-story building. And then also the corner, we keep talking about taking away corners to kind of lower those spaces. And the corner at the very top, we have a terrace for one of the units. And so again, that brings down the massing to a 3-story, what looks to be a 3-story, but really it's a 4-story at that point. And also the parking, I know we really didn't get to parking, but in this project as well, the parking is wrapped. So we're not even, we don't get to see the parking, but this does have parking to as part of the project. I think that's one of the things that we mentioned before, that now with the density bonus, with the density law, with the state assembly laws, it comes down to increase height, increase density, and lower parking. And so those are these things that, how can we do it to where we get that and still have a successful building. On the project on the right, it's actually a project in Pasadena that what we liked about this project, well, it has this style that we're talking about, the Spanish Mission, but this is actually a 7-story building, right, John? 6-story building. But again, we're stepping back, and at the street, they have the 4-story portion of it, and then it steps back up ultimate to a 6-story building. And this is a successful way to bring a new development to a project that's going to be, it's very dense. It's a lot of density. You can just tell by the size, but it doesn't overbear. It doesn't stand like a 6-foot tall box, right?
What I liked about the project on the right is that, to me, a 5-story building that was spread out to the edges would be much more aggressive, if I can use that word. It will be much more prominent on the street than a 6-story building that has the units along the edge peeled away. So this is a case where a taller building with better design is perhaps better than a shorter building that isn't as well designed, and so you can start to mitigate some of the height, and also and keep the density that is either required or the developers is proposing. Yeah, we're getting there, I think. And then yeah, and the one on the left, those are units along the ground floor that do wrap the parking. That's always a good thing, that you aren't looking at parking, especially when in the climate where underground parking has become more expensive than is affordable. And then all this, we try to have our successes. This project in Hollywood, this one was the mother of all projects that had unexpected zoning and practical issues with wires. And then this building that wasn't historic, that was made historic 3 years into the entitlements process, and then designing around that building. And now it's become, despite the wounds that we've all got trying to do this affordable housing project, that It's a well-loved project. It really fits into the street. This historic building was saved, and the building behind is a little bit bigger than we want it to be, but that was the trade-off. But you can see by mitigating with angles and lines and popping it back, you can really mitigate the size. And that is, yeah.
That's the end. Now we can move on to Q&A.
Great. Thank you both. That was so fantastic, especially the part about tricking the eye to make it look shorter, or just a shorter building. I never realized that, but especially with those horizontal ramps, that was fantastic to learn about. There's a lot of questions in the chat. One of them that a theme that showed up a few times, in particular with the open courtyards, is how do you incorporate security into your design? Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously that's going to be a factor on projects in any part of any city. And so what you can do, what you do, that's a good thing. Like, so you,
This one is good.
yeah, you want to talk about that one?
Yeah, go on.
So we're stepping back, and so is there is a separation between public open space, like the street level, and also what becomes your private open space, and again, it's designed in a way that you're gonna, because there's fencing right there, right, John? So there's a gate, and then there's at the very top. So you do have you are still going to have some type of a fence with gates. But it's just to think about it in a way that to do it not necessarily right at the property line, and not like a 6-foot tall fence, but actually step that back as well and have like a bit of a moment for your entry. And so just to kind of give it some room to breathe.
In this project, it's a good question for this project. There were big concerns. There was some people in the development team that wanted the gate down at the bottom of that stair. And the whole point of the stair was to have this, it's not the main entry of the project. It's the secondary entrance to the project that residents can use. They can fob in at the top of the stairway. Our thought here was about the classic all eyes on the street, that this was a very wide open stair. It was not a hidden stair, and that a lot of units were looking down upon it. It was designed brightly and well with plants, and that we thought if there was the gate at the top, it would stop people from getting into the project. But it wasn't really comfortable to be on that stair to hang out on it or loiter on it, because there are a lot of people looking at it. So we try to, when we have places where security is an issue, just really thinking about, it's the broken windows thing too. If something looks like it's abandoned, then people are going to gravitate towards it more. But if it's bright and open, then there'll be less of a magnet for crime or other things.
And next question, when it comes to affordable housing, is there a way to incorporate the feedback and guidance of people with lived experience when it comes to designing one of the buildings? Is that something you guys do, or is it more on the affordable housing developer that tries to incorporate that?
That is a good question. I would say that we don't often have a forum to talk to residents directly, but the developers certainly do, especially if they're affordable housing providers. Some of the good ones, if not all of them, do interact with their tenants. They do get feedback on what works and what doesn't work. And I think some of the things we automatically include, like, how long does it take to get to your unit door? How far are you from the elevator to the laundry room? The laundry rooms are a big thing that we've learned to not have the one laundry room every floor, but have a main laundry room that fronts a courtyard or an open space, so people can do their laundry and go outside without having to walk away from their laundry and maybe wonder what's happening there. Can you think of other examples?
No, I mean, I just want to add, I think for the most time, and it's happened with developers, is that they actually come with that information based on their other projects and and from their management team. That'll say, no, this is what we want. And we're, we're working on projects before and talking about the community space and then what's next to it. And so I remember being in a meeting with the developer, and they're like, oh, we're going to have to talk to our management team to see what they prefer on what that works best for their tenants, for our tenants, right, and our residents. So I find that we get that feedback more from the developers. Yeah.
It is one of a point of pleasure. Sometimes I'll ride my bike around town and go into a building that I've designed, and if there's a resident there, I'll say I was the architect, and most of the time they're very eager to talk to me, and they will let us know what they like and don't like, and what things have worked for them, and what spaces they've used. What the exposure, the open space, which one was really successful and which one wasn't successful. So we do search it out, but there's generally not a lot of formal exposure there, is like a formal meeting.
Mhm.
One question is, how do you incorporate, or do you incorporate ADA accessibility into your designs? And what are the pros and cons of doing that?
Absolutely. That's probably one of the key things. I think it's always something that we have to per code to look at what accessibility is, but especially for affordable housing, it gets an even more like fine grain filter. And so we get really, uh, that's a big, huge element actually. And so a lot of the times these projects will hire a CASP consultant, accessibility specialist, that they're also looking. So it's our eyes on it. It's the developers from their experiences. It's going through plan check for accessibility, and then also an accessibility specialist. So we're all kind of have our eyes on that. And so we're also very sensitive to making sure that we're designing a building that doesn't favor the abled versus the less abled, right? And so we always have it to where if there's courtyard spaces or roof decks, like it's always the same experience, and we're never so for instance, if the main entry, and this goes basic design, right? The main entry to a building is going to be accessible. And that way it's the experience is the same, and not like, oh, if you have a wheelchair, your entrance is off to the side. Like that's not equitable, right?
And this is one of my, this ramp right here that I like a lot, that the stair engages the ramp rather than having them separate, that they're really, and everyone's using both. And it's so everyone is mixing together, and it becomes a beautiful element rather than a side element or something that wasn't thought of or doesn't seem convenient to either the abled or the disabled.
Yeah, and even like I would say, even with design of the units, right? And so there is always a requirement per code to have so many units already accessible with the bars and everything already installed. And so it's not fair, and we don't like to just, oh, we're just going to bunch them all here, but rather why not get one of the top floors, that has the better views, and why not get, so we kind of we disperse those units that are that we're putting into the project, so everyone gets the same experience.
And it's a lot of it's become second nature for us. We know that bathrooms will be large, and we just plan them in accordingly.
Yeah.
We try not to make it painful for anybody because it's all expected. We're getting used to having kitchens that don't have L's in them. Unfortunately, L-shaped kitchens are nice to be in if you're able, but a long linear kitchen is much more easy to navigate. So we're really getting used to unit design that solely has the long kitchen that's fully accessible to everybody.
Yeah,
and they're much easier to design.
As you can tell, this is a very popular subject, but also a lot of the funding requirements has like extra additional requirements for accessibility. So it might be that per code it's 15% or whatever percent need to be accessible or at day one, but because of funding, they're actually going to go to 50% or sometimes even 100% if it's the type of funding.
Or go into universal design, which is the accessibility code plus.
Yeah.
So that's becoming more and more prevalent, is the universal design, which is clear space around beds and having every part of the unit accessible, and having all outlets be, really close to where you can reach them. And so, yeah, it gets more and more every year.
Great. And this question is about enhancing the longevity of affordable housing. So as architects, how do you consider longevity in the design or the types of materials used for the building so that the aging of the building is sustainable over a long term?
Gosh, I want to say that we're aware of making a sure design is universal in the way that it'll age well, but I mean, maybe in the 80s when people were designing building, they didn't think that they were going to be outdated, but you can tell when an 80s building is an 80s building sometimes. But I mean, making sure that you're designing in a way that maybe is modern and contemporary, but isn't like the thing right now, right? So a lot of the times using materials, I think, that are going to be, that are going to age well. I don't know, but it's kind of like a feel. I don't know. Do you have?
My place I would go, I think vinyl windows are railed upon as being awful, but they're actually really durable. They become way more, it's not what you pick up at Home Depot for a couple $100. The energy efficient windows that are in vinyl windows that we have now are really high quality. I was looking at a sample that we had in the office today, and they will last a really long time. stucco is a really durable material, and all these things get, everyone wants wood rots, wood falls apart. And so I think it's accepting that modern materials are durable. The planking here on this guardrail, that's Trex, or it's called AZEK, actually, it's a cousin of Trex, and it's plastic composite. It will last forever. And when you design it in a way that is interesting, this is that material with metal rails between them, it will last forever. So I think there's some misguided energy towards cheap new buildings, when especially now with the energy codes the way they are, things are really high quality and last forever. And technology is a good thing.
Yeah.
One question is, how do you usually approach the parking part? What are the strategies you use to reduce the cost of parking?
Gosh, parking is probably one of the most expensive things right now. One of the things obviously would be at-grade parking. So like the building, the designs where you can have, and you don't have to go underground, but if you can do at-grade parking and maybe you wrap your building around it, that's going to be a huge savings, because I think it's like $60,000 per stall to go to dig. If you're going to go subterranean, each stall's like, it works out to be $60,000 per stall, and that's super expensive. So if you can find a way to have your building have at-grade parking, that's a huge savings for sure. And also, like now with the current state bills, there's a reduced parking, and that's kind of a hard, I think, a hard thing for neighbors to accept. And they're like, oh, there's going to be so much parking on this street now. But like, it's, ideally with affordable housing and reduced parking and transportation development, it's gonna, it works together.
Yeah, and this project has at-grade parking only. So there's an alley at the back, and so right behind the stair down the front, there's about 25 feet or so of quasi-commercial use, and that's all parking in the back. So really, it's not going. Everyone tries to avoid going below grade, and because it's just so expensive. Some of these projects are older, and they do have underground parking. This one, the one in the upper left, did not also had grade parking and above, kind of a modified wrap project. This is because the water table in Playa Vista is only like 9 feet below grade, so we really couldn't go down any. So I think it's about how you treat the exterior, but really every developer avoids going underground. It's probably the third rail of most projects is can't go underground.
Someone asked if you could talk about, in your experience, what are the most common obstacles that hinder the entitlement process?
Boy, I could go off.
How much time do we have? No,
I think public meetings, having multiple public meetings. I think design review, because it's so subjective, especially when the design reviewers aren't clear about what they want. Because I know a lot of historic preservation review boards. City of Santa Monica actually has a very fresh design review. They tell you exactly what they want, and but I think having clear input so everyone knows where everyone's at and everyone working on the same page, and having a really collaborative process that moves along. But I think anytime there's a place where there's public interface, not to avoid public interface, but not to prolong it, that's what developers really try to avoid that. Anything else you can think of off the top of your head?
I would say, it's again, it comes down to like if a specific plan or something that's described, like, oh, it must be this style, it must have this articulation. And it's kind of being flexible with that, and understanding like, well, this is what it should be like per snap, it should be a wedding cake step back building, but we're going to actually ask for a change, because what you can do instead is push and pull, and the massing I think is better. That's always a kind of like a, when they say, oh, but this is what it's described, this is what's prescribed, this is what it is. And so it's that back and forth, trying to come up with something better than just a wedding cake.
Yeah. So design review, waiting for review. I think earlier that there can be, I think the most successful times we have with early processes, Long Beach has a really good process of meeting early with all the departments. LA has one, but it's more optional. Long Beach pretty much requires it to have a case management and really getting in, and they turn things around pretty quickly, and they have good commentary. So I think just making sure that everyone who needs to see it sees it early and gets their comments in. Um, Other cities, it's just waiting for trash handling to look at your site and then tell you that you have to redesign it, a week after week before your funding's due. I think just making sure everything's timely and on
Mhm.
point with that. Otherwise, I'm always optimistic with entitlements. Again, design can solve a lot of problems, and if we're all being collaborative, owner, architect, and the departments, and we can really make progress, but we have to be talking.
Great. Well, that hits our 2 o'clock mark. Thank you so much, John and Monica, for a fantastic presentation. I know
Yeah.
I learned a lot. And I want to let everyone who attended today know that we'll be sending out a recording and, if available, the slide deck. And I'll also be linking our YouTube account if you missed some of the other Affordable Housing 101s that you want to rewatch or watch for the first time. So thanks again to the two of you for a great presentation, and see
Thank
you
you.
all next week.
Hey, you're welcome. Thank
Thank
you.
you.